all civilian police review panel with subpoena power is also a way to keep the police in check. I think the police, to a large extent, reflect a mentality that pervades the political establishment. We have we have these huge gaps in access along racial lines to housing, employment, education, and I think that the mindset of the police, to some extent, reflects the mindset of the broader community. Laws are enforced or not enforced in ways that are disadvantage people of color in the city, and we need to change that, like actually enforcing fair housing and employment laws by detecting and prosecuting those.
I support the review committee. I've called for better police training. Like I mentioned earlier, the city has paid out $8 million to settle claims. Now that's money that certainly could have gone somewhere else with just a little thinking on either side of the issue.
Down to me again. Okay, I want to talk about three things that are important here. First of all, there's the cameras. I really think that would be a very good way to hold police accountable, and as Cam said, it actually will protect the police also from incorrect claims. So I think it helps on both sides. Number two, the Civilian Review Authority. In theory, that's a good idea. I haven't seen it work in the past, and so we do need to do this. But we need to look. We can't just go into it and just say, okay, let's do the Civilian Review Authority again. Look at other cities, see what works. Let's do it right this time. And even subpoena power. If the police or the mayor pays no attention to the results, what does subpoena power mean? So we've got to do it right. And the third thing is professionalism. We need to add professionalism, and I want to bring up an example of that. On the incident on May 10th, when two citizens were killed by the police, and I don't know whose fault, I don't know if it's the police fault or not, but it wasn't handled very well at all, in that what they should have done is treated those killings like any other killings, not non-police killings, separated the police, immediately questioned each of them, and then have tough questioning to figure out the discrepancies. Instead, they gave the police the one cop a week off to decide to think about it, and it wasn't a good way to do it. And so they've got to that's on the. I got to end now, but that's on the captain, and so management is the problem there.
I'm glad they asked the question, because it sort of flows right into my one issue in this campaign, and that's reorganizing government. And they really shouldn't have messed with the civilian review in the first place. I think the problem was the people in charge. We have police chiefs that didn't want to discipline the officers that the committee thought should be. And, we've got a not so effective mayor and a not so effective council that work there. But we could change that basically by bringing this down to the community level. Now, cameras, community, and committees are fine, but if you have a government that's less centralized, and you have, say, the 5 wards I was talking about corresponding to the traditional sectors of the city, you can have a government that works more like the NRP that the current administration and the council destroyed and replaced with something that's kind of obscure, if you ask me, and I'm still not sure how it's supposed to work. But our whole government can work that way, and it can work with people having a say. And if there's problems with crime in your community and police brutality incidents that happen, those can be dealt with by a committee of communities across the city in the same way the CRC operated, and I think that we should do that.
Okay, we're starting on question 3. All right, and it's a little reminiscent of an earlier question, so maybe you don't need to take quite as much time, but whatever. The question 3 is, will you work with the city council to pass a city ordinance which instructs the Minneapolis Police Department to make the enforcement of city and state cannabis laws their lowest law enforcement priority?
You want to say yes or no?
I don't want anything. I'm just reading the question.
The answer to that is I would not pressure the council to pass marijuana laws because, like we've already talked about, there are federal laws also. And I've seen a lot of people that use marijuana and they are really screwed up. And what age do we have to submit? These kids are starting to use it, 12, 13 years old. And, you know, as far as cameras on the police, I say yes to that. But as far as marijuana, I've seen too many people ruining their lives, and I would not support anything for that. And I actually, like I said, federal laws, the marijuana, what we try to pass is still federal issues. Thank you.
Yes, absolutely.
Time's up.
No, I wouldn't, and here's why. As much as I get it, why we might want to proceed with not making marijuana possession a criminal offense, the precedent troubles me. The precedent that we would elect somebody and that elected official could then use their discretion to tell our law enforcement bodies which laws to enforce, that's trouble. Because think of the potential. Think if there's a mayor who has some crazy ideas that you don't like, but they're telling the law enforcement officials to enforce or not enforce the laws according to those crazy whims. And so as mayor, you're essentially responsible for making sure the laws are enforced in the city. Not technically, but essentially you are. And so I see it as the obligation of our elected officials to create the laws, and then the obligation of law enforcement to enforce those laws. And so, as I said, I'll be watching Washington State and Colorado very carefully to see how legalization plays out on the ground there. If their experiment with that change in policy seems to go well, then I would use the bully pulpit to encourage the state legislature to change the law. Throughout, I would have law enforcement enforce the law as it's written. I want to be candid about this. My thinking on this issue has evolved. It used to be that I said, yeah, whatever. We have bigger fish to fry in the city. But then those scenarios that I just described came to mind, and I realized it's a problematic precedent to set if we are enforcing or not enforcing law upon personal whim of a given elected official.
Just like him, I too would not instruct law enforcement to make this the lowest law enforcement priority. However, I would use the office as a bully pulpit to ask the city council and work with the city council to pass a city ordinance to make cannabis the lowest law enforcement priority for law enforcement. I also want to state that if anybody out here has friends that are screwed up that use marijuana, perhaps they are just screwed up people and they use marijuana. It's not the marijuana that's screwing them up. There's a large amount of very highly productive individuals that use cannabis every day, sometimes even throughout the day for various reasons, and it does not mess them up. I believe that cannabis is about as addictive as video games. And also, this lowest law enforcement priority ordinance has been passed in other states, namely San Diego, California has passed this, Denver, Colorado has passed this, Seattle, Washington passed this, and so this is not setting a new precedent of any sort, but it's simply taking good ideas from other cities and bringing them to our city. And I think that's a good idea.
To the question, if I can remember it exactly, is yes. You know, the war on drugs is an unjust war that we should try to quit as quickly as possible, and you know, we need to do as much as we can to undermine its application in the city, as well as advocate for legalization of marijuana. I think that legalization of recreational drugs generally with some sort of control, but taking them out of the criminal justice arena is where we need to go.
I don't view myself as a crazy candidate, but I would say, yes, we need to review the situation with marijuana in Minneapolis. And as far as crazy people using marijuana, crazy people drive cars and drink.
We will be taking a collection for a wireless microphone.
Okay, this is redundant from the previous one, so yeah, I do agree we should make this drug crimes, marijuana crimes, the lowest priority. Well, I would like to make it drug crimes in general, but you know, we can only do what we can do. And so the marijuana crimes the lowest priority. And yeah, I don't think it's a legal issue, as Cam says, or precedent, because the police already have priorities. They enforce certain things more than others. I mean, obviously, if there's a murder, you want them to enforce that. If somebody walks down the street and maybe exposes could be a problem. But if they say somebody goes skinny dipping, they're not going to place the same priority. It should just be a lower priority. We could just make it a formal lower priority. So I don't think that's a problem.
Sorry. I'm a little deaf. I don't think I quite caught the question, and from what I've heard from my fellow candidates here, I think I could go either way, yes or no or whatever. I just don't think marijuana is a terrible problem, and we devote a whole lot more time to it than we should. We've got kind of a Hennepin County Sheriff with crazy ideas about enforcing marijuana laws, so I suppose having one thing happen in Minneapolis and stepping outside and having another could be something that we better handle in our federal system a little higher up than Minneapolis city ordinance. So that would be a no there. But anyway, like I said, I could go either way. As long as I've got a little time, I might as well mention my website. It's at lastminneapolismayor.org. I've got a Twitter account too. I've got a Facebook page, and maybe folks will look at it. Anyway, the drug war's bad. Here's Bob.
You didn't get my website, though. But that's okay.
I'm sorry, you got some.
That's okay. I think I've already answered this question. I'm not certain I would propose the city council members to create an ordinance, which I question whether it's technically enforceable, because we're really talking about state law. And the question of enforcement really falls upon, it's much deeper than that. But I think that, as I said before, the mayor controls the police chief, and the mayor can set a lot of policy with the police chief as far as what is being enforced. And like I said before, the most important thing for police to enforce is not these kind of laws, but to enforce things where people get harmed in some way. And that's what we really need to work on in Minneapolis.
Now we'll have our last question from the sponsors of the event, so I hope people are thinking of your own questions that will be very concise and pointed and eloquent. Here's the fourth question from the sponsors. The Committee for Professional Policing is advocating
a ballot measure that would require police to carry their own professional liability coverage, similar to doctors, lawyers, nurses, and others. The purpose would be to add the element of risk management to individual police accountability. Do you support this approach, and/or what other means could achieve this goal?
Jeff, could I take just a moment? I just want to say the information on this is in a blue flyer in the back. All the candidates received that flyer, and you can take a look at it too, so you know a little bit more about what this is. I also want to say pizza will be coming out of the oven fairly soon. I know we're running over the dinner hour, so I think after this question we'll take a very short break. Don't leave. Your individual questions come up after that, but I think the candidates could use a little relief and as well, and grab some pizza and come back refreshed. So, thank you. Sorry to break in.
Yes, I support this measure to require individual liability insurance for the police. I believe that it's one tool among many that can be used to make them more accountable. As I've said, I'd like to see an improved civilian review authority as well. And the idea of personal body cams, I think, is a good one. It's multiple solutions, not just one. But yes, I definitely favor requiring individual liability insurance.
So politics is the art of the possible. So we have to think about what's possible here. And I like the idea of thinking in terms of a toolbox. What are the different tools that we have? Cop cams, on-body officer cameras, that to me makes perfect sense, and I'll work very hard to get that implemented. If, after implementing cop cams, we still have a problem with allegations and actual incidents of police misconduct, that is, one, eroding trust between citizens and the police force, and two, costing the city millions of dollars, then, yes, I would look at the proposal for individual liability insurance. But I want to be clear. For the vast majority of police officers, who are those brave people of integrity I described, I'm not looking to charge anybody an extra dime to serve on our force. Devil's in the details here, but one potential approach could be that for those officers who have incidents, they pay the marginal increase in the premium on their insurance. The premise of the question...
Exactly the proposal.
Yeah, okay, got it, thank you. Dave said that's exactly the proposal. I want to give a shout out to Dave, because we share the goal. Dave and everybody's worked with him on this proposal. We all share the goal of police force where every single officer acts with integrity and treats citizens well. I want to respectfully note one thing about the premise of the question. I happen to be an attorney, and for attorneys that practice as part of a law firm, they don't pay for their liability insurance. The law firm pays for the liability insurance. So just as we all, people who want a police force of integrity, go forward and make our case, I want to make sure that we're noting that lawyers don't pay out of pocket right now if they're part of a firm, and neither should police officers, who are in the vast majority that act appropriately.
To be honest, I have to do more research on this proposal. I do have some rudimentary thoughts. If there are individuals on the police force that do have a large amount of incidents of violence, that does not necessarily mean that they are a bad police officer, because it really all depends on the circumstances of what is happening in these incidents. And to understand what's happening in these incidents, it requires independent review of the circumstances. And so I am more in favor, and perhaps these both can happen concurrently, but I'm most in favor of having transparent reports on what is actually happening when violent behavior does occur by police officers. And I believe that those incidents should be published by the city so that the citizens of the city can see the data of what officers are doing out in the field, and that we can then put more pressure on our elected officials and on our police chief to actually have some action taken on these issues. And also, I just want to state that I am very much a libertarian. I'm not in favor of more government spending. I don't know if this ordinance would have us be paying less or more, but that would be kind of one of the main criteria that I would be looking at and trying to support this.
I support the approach of having individual police officers pay for liability insurance, in excess of the base rate for cops who are good risks, basically. Adding some things like the cop cams and the civilian police review force, that sort of thing, to ensure that we've got good evidence when we're looking over the we're looking at complaints about cops, whether they're good complaints or not. There was another point that I wanted to make, but I can't remember it, so I'll pass.
I agree with Ken here about firms that pick up the liability for their employees. I think the city of Minneapolis should pick up the liability for the police officers. But I've called for better training. I've said this before. $8 million was just washed away because the police didn't behave well.
Okay, this is kind of a tough question. I'm not sure about this myself, because there definitely needs to be more study. I mean, obviously, if there's a cop out in the SWAT team or something, he's going to be much more subject to issues that could happen. I mean, any insurance company's going to charge more. Whereas if a guy's directing traffic, well, that could be dangerous, but there's bound to be safer things than, say, on a SWAT team. And so I'm not sure that insurance is going to differentiate correctly. As in their blue pamphlet, it mentioned the Mike Sorrell situation, and certainly someone like Mike Sorrell, hopefully, something like this could get rid of guys like him. And anybody who's got, say, more than 10 incidents or something, or maybe even more than 5, maybe we should do something about them. But I'm a little concerned about the average cop being subject to this, because I don't think the insurance is going to differentiate well enough between good cops and bad cops. So I like the idea in principle, but we've got to look at it in more detail, do more study before I'd say yes or no.
Yes. I'd say yes, but I guess it's an open question as to who should pay. I think Cam makes a good point that asking individual officers to pay for that liability insurance might be an imposition. Mark makes a good point that a lot of officers are going to have more liability than others depending on what they do, but I still think it's a good idea. Not that the personal cams are not a great idea. It's just, again, a question of who pays. And to me, I think it makes more sense to have the union do it. For too long, the union of the Minneapolis Police has defended a lot of what I consider really bad police officers. And this would be a prod in the right direction, I think, if there were some financial component involved for the union and keeping what I consider bad officers on the force. Having them pay liability insurance makes a great deal of sense to me. And that's not to say the city couldn't contribute towards that, but all in all, I still think that individual liability insurance for police officers is a great idea.
And I say no. And the reason is it becomes very simple. Think about what we're talking about. We're talking about insurance policy. The city is self-insured right now, meaning they pay it out. Think about an insurance company, they're for profit. If there were 20 million in claims in the last 7 years, which is what was on the question that was sent to us, if we have 1,000 police officers, we don't have that many, That means $20,000 in claims in 7 years per police officer. It's actually more than that because we have less. We have 850 officers. Insurance companies are in the business for profit. It's going to cost probably $40,000 per over 7 years. Who's going to pay for that? Ultimately, the city taxpayer is going to be paying that claim plus the insurance cost. Doesn't make a lot of sense. The problem is a lot deeper than that. The problem is disciplining officers and properly training officers so we don't get these claims. That is what our focus should be. Not on trying to deal with liability insurance, because we're going to end up paying the profit to insurance companies. It's not going to deal with claims. Every time those claims go up, if we don't deal with a real problem, guess what? It's going to cost us more and more and more.
My opinion is if they're off duty, they should have their own insurance. The city of Minneapolis paid $8 million. They seem like they're settling really quick for a lot of money, and that's not fair to the other police officers. And the off-duty police, they should have their own insurance, my opinion. And if they're misbehaving, either the punishment. Sometimes the city is not able to punish them either. And maybe if they have their own insurance, if their rates go up, that's their problem. And, things can change, but $8 million is ridiculous.
Okay. So how long?